Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on the Star Wars Battlefront Reboot Beta. This is the new game by DICE and EA that is coming out on November 17th of this year. And I don't know what to tell you people. I mean, the warning signs were there. From the very beginning, we knew more about what was not in the game than what was in the game, for one. And for another, it was DICE and EA, so you knew something was going to be wrong with it, probably the business model of all things. And so it already stank from the start, but there's that part of you that wants to think, oh, well, it's Star Wars Battlefront, it can still be good, right? Well, then you get into the game and, oh boy. Let's go ahead and talk about what's in the beta. It includes 3 maps, each of which is playable in one game mode. Those are the Tatooine map, which is available only in the survival mode, the Hoth map, which is only available for Walker Assault, and the Sullust map, which is only available for Drop Zone. So each of these has a different game mode associated with it, and thus that's going to color the way that I think about the actual maps themselves. But that's for later on in the video. They do not have any single-player mode except for the survival mode, and the full game is not going to ship with a single-player campaign either, so that's going to be pretty limited. The game runs on matchmaking. It does not have a server browser, even though it does have dedicated servers. So right off the bat, it's doing the whole console-style thing, where it's like, oh, well, we're going to run on dedicated servers, so the connection isn't horrible, but at the same time, we're going to force it into matchmaking so it's a closed system and you can't actually customize anything, etc., etc. And just because of that, Battlefront fans should be going, oh, what have you done? What have you done? And people who played Battlefield are going to be like, well, what the hell, guys? You were fine with this in the Battlefield games. Why are you not fine with it in Battlefront? But we'll delve into how this sort of thing affects the game in a moment. I'm just telling you what's in the beta right now. There's only 4 primary weapons. They're all fully automatic blasters. There is no customization available in the beta. There's only a limited selection of the cards that are available. Max rank in the beta is 5, so that's what you're getting yourself into with this. Now, first things first, the presentation is straight up the best part of the game, especially in the sound design department, which I will get to in a moment. But as far as the visuals go, they're crisp, they're well detailed for the most part, but then you have those weird things here and there, like the animations on the hero characters, which are Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker in this, and they just look clunky. There's not really any other way to describe them, honestly. It's just kind of hard to put a real word to the way they look. They just don't look right, if that makes sense. Not to mention the fact that they have a blatant continuity error with Luke Skywalker wearing his black outfit and having a green lightsaber at the Battle of Hoth. Oh dear. Maybe they'll fix it in the full game, but somehow I doubt that. Anyway, visuals look fine for the most part. There's nothing really glaringly bad about them other than the fact that it's a Frostbite engine game, which is to say that you might have some blinding problems from the bloom lighting and the light source problems that the game has. Luckily, it's not quite as terrible as Battlefield has been over the past couple of years. So you can actually see what you're doing half the time. The problem is that everyone blends into the environment in different ways. For example, on the Hoth map, it's actually really hard to see the stormtroopers because they're all wearing white armor. And it's also kind of hard to see the rebels because they're also wearing white. So you can barely make them out just by the way that they move against the white background. And so that can prove problematic. Also, the rebels have blatant advantages in terms of their outfits when put on the Sullust and Tatooine maps. Now, luckily, the Tatooine map is not a versus mode, but on Sullust, they actually blend in a lot better than the Imperials because, once again, the Imperials are wearing white armor. They just stick out like a sore thumb, and yet the Rebels are wearing more brownish-colored outfits. So they blend in with the gray and black environment a bit better than the Stormtroopers do, at least. So that can be kind of annoying, but it's something you can work around once you get used to it. The only real standout with regards to the visuals is actually the particle effects. They're actually really, really nice. Particularly the blaster fire just looks great. The explosions look great. There's not much in the way of destruction. I mean, some of the cover will chip away, but that's kind of it, and there's not really much of that. And it doesn't kick up dust anywhere near as much as something like Battlefield 4 or Battlefield 3 did. So you can still see what you're doing for the most part. It's just being able to actually sight in your target and shoot at them is the problem with it. So at least the visuals are alright at the worst and pretty good at the best. But then there's the sound design, which is downright amazing. They absolutely nailed the Star Wars feel with this stuff. When you fire a blaster, it sounds fantastic. And it echoes throughout the map. If you're in this kind of valley or gorge environment, then it's going to echo and echo and echo, and it just sounds wonderful. Every single one of the blasters just is fantastic. And the rest of the sound effects are all absolutely brilliant. Explosions sound fantastic. The actual battle chatter is great. The only real misstep with the sound design is that the voice acting on the hero characters is nowhere near authentic. I mean, you've got super authentic sound effects where they sound like they were taken directly from the movies and enhanced to a ridiculous degree to sound friggin' awesome. You've got the actual John Williams score, and then you've got the hero characters, Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, who sound basically nothing like they're supposed to. It's actually really disappointing. But at least they absolutely nailed the rest of the sound design, so there is that. But then we come to the elephant in the room, the gameplay. Because there's no story in this thing, it's multiplayer only. Except for sort of single player. They have a single player mode available, but it's not campaign, so there's no story here. As I mentioned before, the beta has 3 maps, each of which has a different mode on it. Let's start with the one that can be played solo. Survival mode has you and possibly a buddy fighting against waves of enemies. Now, the only difficulty level they provide in the beta right now is normal, and it is way too easy. I beat it on my first try without even breaking a sweat. I did die once, but that was only because an ATST blasted me to bits. And then I respawned because you get lives in that mode, and then just annihilated the ATST because it wasn't that big of a deal. The AI is absolutely pathetic. Most of the stormtroopers just kind of run around like chickens with their heads cut off and occasionally shoot at you. They have special troopers available to spice things up, but those really don't go far enough. One of them is a heavy trooper who has a heavy blaster that is basically a machine gun, and he takes more damage than normal. That's it. You've got a jump trooper who has a shield until he goes and uses his jetpack, and then he's incredibly easy to take down. Again, not that big of a deal. And you've got snipers, who are also incredibly easy to take down and don't pose much of a threat. The only thing that poses a threat in the survival mode is the ATSTs. And those only pose a threat because you don't have any weapons to actually take them down unless you've managed to capture a drop pod and managed to get lucky with the things that it drops. Or unless you have the ion torpedo in your repertoire. Otherwise, you're basically just going to have to shoot at the thing over and over and over again until it finally dies. And you might be able to use the ion charge ability to increase your damage against the vehicles, but other than that, you don't really have much in the way of anti-vehicle weaponry in survival mode. So that's the only thing that really makes that challenging. Now, I mentioned drop pods, and this is true for both survival mode and for the actual drop pod mode. When you capture a drop pod, it will actually drop 3 power-ups, and these take the 4th slot that you have. You have 3 different slots for your cards. The first and 3rd of these are just things that are special abilities, like a jetpack or the ion torpedo, grenade launcher, the sniper rifle, which is called the cycler rifle, things like that. And then there's the 2nd slot, which is for your charge ability. This requires you to run around the map and pick up points of charge in order to actually be able to use it. Now, in the adversarial multiplayer, you actually start out with a large amount of charges. I think it's actually 10 charges for it. And you can pick up more than that. But you have to pick up these charge points that are scattered around the map in order to actually be able to use this ability. This is stuff like I mentioned, ion charge, which increases your damage against vehicles for a short time. So basically, you get the points, it charges up your weapon for a while, and that's kinda it. There's not really anything all that special about it. Now, you can customize your loadouts in the adversarial mode. In the survival mode, you cannot. There are only 2 available. One of them has the ion torpedo, one of them has the grenade launcher, and that's pretty much the only major difference between them. But they are sort of complements to each other, so that's what they do that for. In the adversarial mode, you can pretty much do whatever you want. You have to unlock these cards, however, and these are based both on rank and on the amount of credits that you earn. Credits are earned just through normal gameplay. They don't seem to be a microtransaction. At least I hope they aren't a microtransaction. But you spend those in order to actually unlock the thing once you've managed to get the appropriate rank to unlock it in addition. It's a weird system. I don't like it, and frankly, it just kind of cheapens the whole experience because you start out with absolutely nothing. You have to earn every single thing in the game, and it is really tedious at the beginning because you're just running around as a stormtrooper or as a rebel with a blaster rifle, and that's all you've got. You can't throw grenades, you can't do jetpack jumps, you can't do anything really other than just run around and shoot stuff. And that gets really boring really quickly. So at least in the survival mode, they have the decency to give you stuff no matter what. But in the adversarial mode, it's already poised to be pretty bland. And then when you finally get into the drop zone mode, you're basically just running around trying to secure a drop pod that jumps in. And once you've secured that, it will open up, give you the 3 items that you can select from, and you move to the next one. It's a very straightforward, very simplistic mode. The map it's on is just a complete mess. Lots of different pathways. It feels like a Call of Duty map, only just scaled up to a smaller Battlefield map scale. And what ends up happening is that you just get shot from whatever direction, and you're not sure what, and it gets pretty irritating. Add to that something that you will find out very, very quickly, and that is that the amount of damage you do with your blasters doesn't really matter so much as the rate of fire that that blaster has. Time and time again, I would put well-placed shots on my enemy, and they would just mow me down because they had a higher rate of fire than my E11 blaster as the Empire. Once I unlock the A280 blaster that the Rebels get, which has a higher rate of fire and about the same damage, there was no reason to use the E11 anymore other than I absolutely love the way it sounds. That's about it. It has a faster rate of fire, therefore it's better. And then once you unlock the heavy blaster, which is basically a blaster machine gun, you're good to go because you're not going to need anything else. It may do less damage, but it doesn't matter because you've got a ridiculous rate of fire and everybody goes down pretty easily anyway. So the short thing to take away from that is that combat is incredibly spammy in this thing. You point your weapon in their general direction and you hold the left mouse button down and you're good to go. And that's pretty much it. I mean, your weapon will overheat eventually, but you've got infinite ammo. All you need to do is actually, when the thing overheats, there's a yellow bit of the overheat bar that if you press the R key when the cursor passes over the yellow area, and you will instantly fix the overheating problem so you can just keep going full auto fire. Every single one of the blasters is fully automatic. So there's really no reason to use anything but the heavy blaster at this point just because of that. So the question would then become, well, how did the blasters handle? They have basically no recoil, basically no spread to them, and so they're all just pew-pew accurate laser thingies, which is kind of what you would expect considering this is Star Wars, but at the same time, it just makes them less satisfying to use. And then you actually get to the rest of the gameplay. The cards themselves run on a cooldown timer. So when you fire your cycler rifle or you throw a thermal detonator, for example, it will just take a few seconds to cool down and then you can do it again. There's infinite ammo for everything in this game. The only thing that has a finite ammo supply are the power-up things, like the rocket launcher, for example, and the charged ability. And that's kind of a dubious one as far as actually having a finite ammo supply goes, but it still has a finite supply of charges. Now, luckily, nothing seems particularly overpowered as far as damage output goes. I mean, throwing grenades infinitely is pretty annoying, but Luckily enough, it's actually kind of hard to get hit by one, believe it or not, because the throwing physics for the thermal detonators is actually kind of ridiculous. So you'll just fling them really, really far and not sure where they'll end up. It actually reminds me a lot of Call of Duty 4 in that regard, where the grenade throwing range was just ridiculous. But the first-person shooter combat itself is incredibly unsatisfying and really casualized. It feels ludicrously simplistic, even compared to the older Star Wars Battlefront games. The only thing that is remotely a semblance of skill is being able to lead your targets, which you can do in a few seconds. Once you think, oh, well, I have to lead my targets a bit, not a problem anymore. But what about the rest of the game? Now, this is where things can get messy. The infantry combat is the only thing in both the survival mode and the drop pod mode. But when you get to Walker Assault mode, you have the addition of vehicles. Now, you might think that this would be where things get interesting. No, it isn't. Unfortunately, the way they've set up vehicles in this thing is that they're power-ups. They don't spawn on the map anymore. What instead spawn are these tokens you can pick up, and then you can call in a vehicle of some kind and start piloting it, whether it be something like a TIE fighter, or a snow speeder, or an X-Wing, or an AT-ST, or something like that. And on the Walker Assault mode, you also get to have the gunner's seat, basically, of the AT-AT, so you can fire its massive cannons and blast the living crap out of everything in your path. But they take the place of the special weapon slot. So if you had, for example, picked up a proximity mine previously, then you can't just run over a vehicle thing, pick it up, and then immediately use it. Instead, you have to switch it out for what you had picked up before, and thus you lose the old thing, it goes away forever, and you get the vehicle thing. So how do the vehicles handle? Well, the AT-ST's alright. It handles about like I would expect an AT-ST to handle. But the flying vehicles are downright horrible. I got the chance to pilot the TIE Fighter and the TIE Interceptor. I did better with the Interceptor because I had gotten a bit more used to the controls by then. The turning is just downright atrocious in this thing. It might be slightly better on a gamepad, but on keyboard and mouse, it's downright horrible. You can't turn worth a damn. And so trying to do dogfights with that is downright horrible. It's not at all satisfying. It ends up just being a complete mess. What it ends up feeling more like is that the air support is actually meant to just blast the living crap out of people on the ground. And that's kind of depressing, actually. So instead of using the air support in a more effective manner, for example, attacking the AT-ATs when they have their shields taken down, is not really much of a thing. And you don't really see people using the vehicles very effectively, partly because they're ridiculously difficult to pilot, other than the AT-ST. And the only other thing that really fits into that whole extra piloting thing is when you pick up the hero character token, which allows you to respawn as a hero character, which in the beta are Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. And these guys run around and are just forces of nature on the battlefield, except that they can get taken down incredibly easily. So they're nowhere near as good as they were in Battlefront 2. In fact, they're actually kind of weak, unless you manage to get lucky and get them in a more tightly packed area so they can't get flanked and hit from the sides and behind with tons and tons of blaster fire and thermal detonators and everything. And they can deflect shots from the front. So they can just deflect the shots, go up to the enemy, and then just smack them with the lightsaber and they go flying and everything. So they're actually really not that powerful, oddly enough, and they're not satisfying to use. And here's the main problem with Battlefront. Within about an hour and a half of playing the drop pod mode as well as the Walker Assault mode and the survival mode, getting the character up to the maximum rank in the beta, I feel like I have actually played all there is to play with Star Wars Battlefront. It's a mind-numbingly simplistic game to the point where it's actually kind of insulting to compare it to even the original Battlefront and the sequel to Battlefront. Those games were really simplistic, don't get me wrong. They were very simplistic versions of Battlefield, basically. Battlefront by DICE is actually kind of insultingly simplistic, to the point where it feels incredibly vapid and soulless. Like it's just meant to be a quick cash-in that they slapped together and said, you know what, they're not going to care how it plays because it's Star Wars. And the thing is, we do care how it plays. That was why the previous two games were actually so enjoyable. Maybe they weren't the best balanced games around, maybe they weren't exactly the pinnacle of game design or anything like that. In fact, they were actually not that great games all around. But they were matters of the whole is better than the sum of its parts. They were just ridiculously fun to play. Star Wars Battlefront 2015 is boring. It's not even like Battlefield in that Battlefield outright pisses you off if you play it. Battlefront is just tedious. It's boring, it's vapid, it's lifeless, it's soulless. And that's the really sad part, because you have that bit of really great stuff in it with the sound design where you're like, oh, well, this sounds like Star Wars. This might actually be like Star Wars. And then you play it and you're like, the hell is this? Maybe it's just the absolutely minimal amount of content in this thing. Maybe it's the fact that the gameplay basically requires no skill whatsoever. Maybe it's the fact that it's been simplified to the point where it's outright insulting to your intelligence, especially if you've played prior Battlefront games, because there's way more content in the original Battlefront than there is poised to be in this. And that's sad, because the original Battlefront really didn't have all that much content. And you pretty much know that EA is going to nickel and dime the living crap out of us with this one, with DLC up the wazoo, because that's what they do with every single one of their games. So the takeaway from this is that I am extremely disappointed. I'm not a huge fan of the original Star Wars Battlefront or Battlefront 2 for that matter. I really did enjoy them, but they're not the best games around. I can very easily see the problems with them. But then you get to this, and it's just not good. And while there's a chance that they'll turn things around for the full release, at this point, I feel like it's so far into development that they can't. That there's not really going to be much way of saving this. And with this thing running on matchmaking, I can see this thing dying in a couple of months. It reminds me a lot of Titanfall, where there was a lot of buzz surrounding the game, and only a couple of months after release, it was pretty much dead. And part of that was just the ridiculously small amount of content in the game. But the difference here is that Titanfall was actually a really good game, and it actually did innovate somewhat. This doesn't. This feels like a blatant cash grab. And there's no way in hell I'm picking this thing up for full price. Let's put it that way. I'm going to wait until it goes on sale for a really deep discount, and then I'll pick it up and review it. But I'm really not looking forward to that anymore. Thanks for watching.